Now, if we want to have this react with that, the electrons can't form bonds because they are not appropriately, because one of them, I mean, these two could form a bond, but these two cannot because they have the same spin. Okay? You don't have to remember that. This is just an illustration why oxygen in its standard ground form is not a very reactive gas. Because there are spin constraints, and kinetically the reaction. But as you see under normal conditions, in normal temperature, normal pressure, it's actually not very reactive. Because thermodynamically speaking, if we are surrounded by 20% oxygen, we should all immediately burn. Because thermodynamically, it's favorable for oxygen to react with proteins, with fats, with anything. Okay, so thermodynamically, we should all, just by sitting in 20% oxygen, we should immediately burn. But for some reason, that's not what's going on. And the reason for that is this strange electronic structure. So under this configuration with two unpaired electrons, oxygen does not really want to react with, for example, organic compounds. Because in order to react with the normal compound, so imagine that these two electrons look like this in the molecule. Okay, they're in different orbitals, but that's really not that important. Okay, so we have two electrons with the same spin. But normal compounds have electrons like this. They're in one orbital and they have opposite spins. Now, if we want to have this react with that, the electrons can't form bonds because they are not appropriately, because one of them, I mean, these two could form a bond, but these two cannot because they have the same spin. Okay? You don't have to remember that. This is just an illustration why oxygen in its standard ground form is not a very reactive gas. Because there are spin constraints, and kinetically, the reaction is just unlikely. Even though thermodynamically, it would be favorable. So if we looked at delta G of, our bodies burning in oxygen, the delta G is highly negative. It releases a lot of energy when it happens. But normally, it just doesn't happen, as you can all see. The reason for that is that oxygen is a biradical, a very strange molecule. However, oxygen can be excited to a higher energy state where the two electrons pair. So if we heat oxygen, or if we irradiate it with radiation, this ground state, also called triplet state, can be changed to an excited state called singlet state, singlet oxygen. Now this singlet oxygen has paired electrons, and therefore is extremely reactive. This conversion of ground state oxygen to singlet oxygen is what we do when we strike a match and light a fire. So we need to heat oxygen up so that it becomes more reactive, and that's how we make wood or paper burn. Okay, so it's the excitation from ground state to singlet state. So singlet oxygen is one of the reactive forms of oxygen, but we're actually not going to talk about it very much today, because in human physiology and pathology, singlet oxygen is not that important. It's kind of important, but not that important. So you know from other lectures that oxygen is needed in our body for various reactions. But now I just said that it doesn't actually want to react with anything. So how can we make oxygen, how do our cells make oxygen more reactive? One way of doing it is by reacting it, letting it react with other radicals. Okay? Oxygen is a biradical, so it will have difficulty reacting with normal chemicals that have paired electrons. But it can actually react reasonably well if we have a molecule that has unpaired electrons. Does it make sense? Does it make sense? Because the pairing of the electrons is actually, so these two, this electron's like this. These two can pair, and we don't care about this one. So they can actually form a bond like that. Okay? So we can let oxygen react with other free radicals. Now, where in our body do we have stable radicals? Could anyone guess?
Metal.
Metals. Okay, why do you think the metals are free radicals?
Because for example, the zinc and the other metals, they have free radicals.
Excellent. So, transition metal ions. Transition metals such as zinc, copper, iron, molybdenum, manganese, all these metals, they're metal ions. Their electronic structure is such that they have unpaired electrons. So they actually behave like free radicals. Okay? So most notably, iron 2+, copper plus, manganese, and some other ones. You'll recall from our lectures on the electron transport chain that indeed these metals are extremely important in the complexes in the electron transport chain, because that's how we make oxygen react with the electrons that come through. So in cytochrome oxidase, in complex 4, we have both copper and iron in heme that are necessary for oxygen to be actually reduced to water. Okay, so this is how we make oxygen more reactive in our body. So that's how we make it reactive, because we want it to be reactive. However, there are other possibilities for oxygen to become more reactive. And that is by reducing it, by adding more electrons to it. So oxygen itself, O2, not that reactive. But if we add one electron, what do we get? If we reduce it by one electron? Superoxide. This is superoxide. Okay, negative charge, still O2, but we lost one radical. We started with 2 unpaired electrons. Now we lost one. Why did we lose one? Why did we lose one of the 2 unpaired electrons?
Because of the reducing.
Because?
Can we reduce it?
So we added one more electron, which paired with one of them, and only one is left. Okay? In the beginning I said that having 2 unpaired electrons is really awkward for reacting with anything. But having just one unpaired electron, that makes a molecule pretty reactive. So superoxide is the first product.
안녕하십니까, 막다키님. 이게 비타민 C의 항산화 작용을 이해하는데 아주 중요한 화학.
Product of one electron reduction, and is one of the group of very reactive oxygen species. And actually, reactive oxygen species is the current name for what used to be called free radicals or oxygen-derived free radicals. So reactive oxygen species. Is the name, and superoxide is one of them. It's basically the first step in the reduction. Okay. What happens if we add another electron to superoxide? What do we do?
Take molecular oxygen.
No, we're adding electrons. Okay. So we took molecular oxygen, we added one electron, now we're adding another electron.
The second, or it becomes the second paired electron.
True, but what is the product?
Same.
No, it's not. We started with this, and we're adding another electron.
Again, I'm negative charge.
Yeah, so it's going to be O2 2 minus. What is that?
Super duper oxide.
No. If we react with 2 protons,
Hydrogen peroxide.
yeah, well, we just call it peroxide because it doesn't have to be hydrogen peroxide, but we call this molecule peroxide. So this is superoxide.
Can I say something about the spin of the electrons?
Yeah.
If the electron has the opposite spin of the electron of the oxygen, wouldn't that attract the oxygen and then we'll have...
Sorry, can you repeat that?
If we had an electron and it's, say, and it's opposite spin,
Yep.
wouldn't that attract the electron out of the oxygen molecule of the superoxide?
Well, if you, I mean,
As we did on the first,
yeah, that's exactly what happens. So this second electron pairs with this unpaired electron. Is that your question?
Okay, yes.
So therefore, peroxide, and that was something I was going to get to, peroxide is not a free radical.
But if the electron has an opposite, has the same spin?
Well, if we have 2 molecules and they both have electrons of the same spin, they won't react. So it will only react with a molecule that has the opposite spin so that they can form a bond. Okay? But that's not a problem because in a mixture, in a gas or whatever, you have molecules with either that spin or that spin. The problem is here because you have to have, basically in order for this to react, you would have to have a molecule that looks like this or an orbital that looks like this. And you just can't find it. Okay? Because almost nothing has an electronic structure like this. That's why oxygen looking like this can't react with normal things. Okay? But reacting just 1 electron is much, much easier. Okay? Because we only need basically 1 in the opposite direction, not 2 of them at the same time. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So again, just to reiterate, it's important to remember that peroxide is not a free radical. But it still is a reactive oxygen species because peroxide is still reactive and can do various things, but it's not a free radical. Okay? Right. What happens with peroxide if we add 2 more electrons? We could go step by step. We get a 1 and the second one, but I don't want to complicate things too much.
2 hydrogen peroxide.
What? Just add the things together.
Becomes -4 charge.
Okay, so we could say that it becomes O2 4 minus in a way, but that's actually not what happens. What we get is we get 2O2 minus. And what is that? We get superoxide with peroxide. What is this?
Oxide. Oxide.
Exactly. Oxide. But for most of our reactions, actually what happens next is we again add 4 protons and we get 2 molecules of water. Okay? There is actually an intermediate step. I kind of skipped 1 step by adding 2 electrons at the same time. But if we add just 1 electron to peroxide, we produce probably the most important molecule out of these reactive oxygen species, which looks like this. What is that?
Hydroxide.
Huh?
Hydroxide.
Hydroxyl? No, it's not hydroxide. Hydroxide would be OH minus. This H of dot. It's called
Hydroxyl radical.
hydroxyl radical.
점 찍힌 게 레디컬인가?
Hydroxyl radical. And An hydroxyl radical can be produced from hydrogen peroxide or from peroxide in the presence of iron or copper. So once again, the reactive oxygen species that we're going to be talking about today, apart from singlet oxygen, which we're not really going to mention again, are superoxide, peroxide, and hydroxyl radical. These are the important ones. Out of these, hydroxyl radical for the damage, for the concept of oxidative stress, is by far the most important because it's by far the most reactive of all of these. Okay, so hydroxyl radical is many orders of magnitude more reactive than either superoxide or peroxide. Hydroxyl radical will react with anything that it encounters. So the first molecule that hydroxyl radical, that for example formed by this reaction, the first molecule that hydroxyl radical finds, it will react with immediately. It's extremely, extremely reactive. Okay? This also explains, this scheme explains why iron, especially ferrous ions and cuprous ions, are considered as pro-oxidants, because they can change, they can convert hydrogen peroxide to hydroxyl radical, which is extremely, extremely reactive. Okay? So too much iron, too much copper can actually increase oxidative stress. They can be dangerous. That's also why our cells regulate the levels of free iron or free copper very tightly. They don't allow copper just being in the cytoplasm or just lying around, because it would actually react with hydrogen peroxide and cause these horrible things. Yep?
Would this whole mechanism be affected by hemochromatosis?
Of course, yeah. In hemochromatosis, I don't know, do you all know what hemochromatosis is? Okay. What you get is iron overload, so your tissues contain more iron than is normal. Now, most of this iron is in inactive form, either in ferritin or in various crystals, etc., etc. But some of it is in this free reactive form, and indeed, a lot of damage, for example, to the liver in hemochromatosis, is caused exactly by this reaction. Okay, by the production of hydroxyl radical by free iron. That's part of the reason why the liver basically causes cirrhosis and other problems in hemochromatosis. Okay? Any questions about the chemistry of reactive oxygen species?
Fe랑 CU를 많이 먹으면 안 된다는 거지.
Kind of having a hard time picturing how the difference in the electron shells would look between a hydroxide and a hydroxyl, because one has a negative charge,
yeah,
and one has an unpaired electron.
Yeah. Basically, you would need to add another electron to hydroxyl radical in order to get hydroxide.
Yeah, but if we have hydroxide, then it's balanced, right? Then they're all the electrons are paired.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah.
Okay. You can find either on the internet or in some chemistry textbooks, you can actually find the molecular orbital of oxygen, and it makes it a little bit easier maybe to see how things actually pair together and how they form bonds. Yep.
If hydroxyl radical is so reactive, then how can it be contained inside the lysosome?
How can it be contained?
Inside the lysosome.
I don't think it is.
No.
I don't think it is in the lysosome. Did I say that it was in the lysosome? No. Okay. No. It's hydroxyl radical is so reactive that it disappears immediately. Okay, after it's produced, it just disappears. So while, for example, superoxide hydrogen peroxide can be actually used by our cells to do things, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, hydroxyl radical is so reactive, it's just damaging. You can't regulate it, you can't contain it. There's nothing you can do. Okay, there are no enzymes that interact with it. It's just so reactive, it will react with anything. Okay? Okay, no more questions? Is it all clear? Okay. Now let's talk about what these radicals can do in our cells. So how do these reactive oxygen species, how do they cause damage? Actually, before we start talking about that, I'll just mention another abbreviation, and that's reactive nitrogen species. Reactive nitrogen species are free radicals and other reactive compounds containing nitrogen. Okay, so reactive oxygen species are just with oxygen. Reactive nitrogen species contain nitrogen. The source of reactive nitrogen species is nitric oxide. Okay? Nitric oxide, itself a free radical, can react with superoxide and can form a very strange compound which looks like this. Could anyone maybe try and name this compound?
Deoxynitric oxide.
No, it's called peroxynitrite. So if you take away one oxygen, it's nitrite. NO2 minus. Yeah? But there's one more oxygen there, so it's called peroxynitrite. And peroxynitrite is another very reactive molecule. And these days, people actually think that peroxynitrite and its further breakdown products, because it can cause the production of hydroxyl radical as well, that these are actually very important in pathology, in causing damage to cells. Okay, so just so you know, there are reactive nitrogen species related to nitric oxide.
And peroxynitrite is considered RNS or RNS?
It's considered?
Reactive oxygen species or nitrogen?
It's RNS. It's RNS. Contains nitrogen. It's a reactive nitrogen species. Okay. Good. Let's now talk about the damage. What do these reactive species, what do they do to our cells? So if we look at the main chemical components of the cell, we have lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, basically. Talking about the organic components. Lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. All these three groups can be and are damaged by reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species. So let's talk about the individual groups and the specific mechanisms of damage. Let's start from the bottom. So let's start with nucleic acids. Nucleic acids can be damaged by reactive oxygen species in two ways. Either the reactive oxygen species, the molecule, can react with the base, or it can react with the sugar. If, for example, hydroxyl radical, which is the most reactive, reacts with the base, it modifies the base. It modifies the nucleotide. So, for example, you can get a hydroxyl group appearing on the base where normally there is none. Okay? So hydroxyl radical just binds to the base and adds a hydroxyl group. This sometimes doesn't do very much, or the cell just gets rid of the modified base. But sometimes this can lead to mutation, because the modified base in the pairing, in for example replication, it behaves like a different base than it normally is. Does this make sense? Yeah. So the modification of a base can lead to mutation. And mutation can potentially lead, for example, to cancer formation, to carcinogenesis. If the hydroxyl radical or any other reactive oxygen species reacts with the sugar, what are the sugars in nucleic acids? Ribose or deoxyribose. So if it reacts with ribose or deoxyribose, it can cause a strand break. So the whole strand is broken. Now again, you know from molecular biology that our cells can quite easily repair these breaks, but sometimes in the repair, mistakes are made, okay? And therefore, even strand breaks can lead to recombination, to chromosome damage, or even mutation. So thiol groups are part of cysteine residues in proteins, and these thiol groups can be quite easily oxidized by reactive oxygen species. The oxidation can have several different forms. One of the possible results of oxidation of thiol groups is a reaction with another thiol group and the formation of a disulfide bridge. Or, well, the disulfide anyway. Okay, you've seen this in molecular biology, that disulfide bridges are an important structural component of proteins. But in this case, these disulfides are produced between cysteines that normally should not produce a disulfide bridge. Okay, so in proteins you have structural disulfide bridges, but if a
잠깐만. 아이씨. 야, 너무 어려운 거 많이 나오잖아. 그래서 챗GPT한테 일단 화학 용어 정리를 한번 부탁해 보겠습니다. 챗GPT가 있으면 뭐 글루타치온도 나오는구만. 아직 안 나왔죠. 산화환원 반응. 야, 이거밖에 안 나왔다고. 졸라 많이 나왔는데. 오케이. 활성산 reactive oxygen species. 슈퍼 옥사이드 나왔죠. H2O2 하이드록실 레디컬 나왔죠. OH dot. free radical. 슈퍼 옥사이드. 산소 분자가 한 개의 전자를 받아 생산이지. 한 개의 전자 받았을 때 슈퍼 옥사이드. 두 개의 전자 받으면 페록사이드가. 아, 이거죠. 하이드록실 레디컬은 4개 받은 것 같았는데 4개의 전자를 받으면 이게 된다고 했으면 2개를 받으면 과산화수소가 되고 4개를 받으면 하이드록실 레디컬이 된다. 그거 나왔죠. 안티옥시던트 아직 안 나왔고 자세하게 해주네요. 자, 산소 분자 기본일 때는 바이레디칼이라고 했죠. 아까 바이레디칼. 슈퍼옥사이드는 전자를 하나 받았을 때 슈퍼옥사이드. O2가 전자를 하나 받으면 슈퍼옥사이드가 된다. 반응성이 좀 높다. 얘도 좀 높다고 했죠. 그 다음에 과산화. 이거 과산화 2개로 받으면 이게 프로톤과 반응을 해야 과산화수소가 되고 그냥 전자만 2개 받으면은 페록사이드 아이온이 된다. 과산화 이온이 수소 이온과 여기서 페록사이드 아이온이 프로톤을 아까 만나면은 과산화수소가 된다고 했죠. 하이드로진 페록사이드 중 체내 산화제고 하이드록실 레디컬로 바뀔 수 있다. 자, 이제 가장 중요한 하이드록실 레디컬. 과산화수소, 그러니까 하이드로젠 페록사이드가 메탈 아이온이랑 만나면은 아까 여기 나왔었죠. Fe랑 Cu를 만나면 하이드록실 레디컬과 수선화 이온이 생성이 된다. 이건 펜톤 리액션, 펜톤 반응이라고 불린다. 그리고 하이드록실 레디컬은 세포 손상을 일으킨다. 오케이. 되죠. 이 정도면은 뭐, 야, 이거만 해도 10분 나오겠다, 이거 영상. 이거만 하려고 해도. 처음에 산소 분자는 바이오레디컬. 전자 하나 받으면 슈퍼옥사이드. 전자 2개 받으면 페록사이드. 그게 프로톤과 반응하면 하이드로진 페록사이드. 전자 이때 금속이온과 반응하면은 하이드록실 레디컬. 전자 4개, 앞에서 전자 4개 받는다고 했던 것 같은데. 자, 여기서부터.
Have a molecule that looks like this, or an orbital that looks like this, and you just can't find it. Okay, because almost nothing has an electronic structure like this. That's why oxygen, looking like this, can't react with normal things. Okay, but reacting just one electron is much easier. Okay, because we only need basically one in the opposite direction, not 2 of them at the same time. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, it's important to remember that peroxide is not a free radical. But it still is a reactive oxygen species, because peroxide is still reactive and can do various things, but it's not a free radical. Okay?
리액티브지만 프리 레디컬은 아니다.
Right. What happens with peroxide if we add 2 more electrons? We could go step by step. We get a 1 and the second one, but I don't want to complicate things too much.
여기서 하이드로진 페록사이드에서 가는 게 아니고
What?
이거지. 2 pair of
Just add the things together.
Becomes -4 charge.
Okay, so we could say that it becomes O2 4 minus in a way, but that's actually not what happens. What we get is
2O, 2 minus.
we get 2O 2 minus. And what is that?
여기는 안 나왔는데. 2O2 minus.
So we get superoxide with peroxide. What is this?
Oxide. Oxide.
Exactly. Oxide. But for most of our reactions, actually what happens next is we again add 4 protons. And we get 2 molecules of water. Okay?
옥사이드에서
There is actually an intermediate step. I kind of skipped one step by adding 2 electrons at the same time. But if we add just 1 electron to peroxide, we produce probably the most important molecule out of these reactive oxygen species, which looks like this. What is that?
Hydrogen.
Huh?
하이드록실 레디컬.
Hydroxyl? No, it's not hydroxide. Hydroxide would be OH minus. This is HO dot. It's called hydroxyl radical. Hydroxyl radical. And hydroxyl radical can be produced from hydrogen peroxide or from peroxide in the presence of iron or copper. So once again, oxide. But for most of our reactions, actually what happens next is we again add 4 protons, and we get 2 molecules of water.
알았어. 하이드록시 레디컬만
It
알면
just disappears.
되잖아.
So while, for example, superoxide hydrogen peroxide can be actually used by our cells to do things, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, it's a reactive nitrogen species. Okay?
알았어.
Good. Let's now talk about the damage. What do these reactive species, what do they do to our cells? So if we look at the main chemical components of the cell, we have lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, basically. Talking about the organic components. Lipids, other sugars and nucleic acids. Look at the main chemical components of the cell, we have lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, basically. Talking about the organic
NA가
components.
nucleic
Lipids,
acids구나.
proteins, and nucleic acids. All these 3 groups can be and are damaged by reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species. So let's talk about the individual groups and the specific mechanisms of damage. Let's start from the bottom. So let's start with nucleic acids.
nucleic acids.
Nucleic acids can be damaged by reactive oxygen species in 2 ways. Either the reactive oxygen species, the molecule, can react with the base, or
뮤테이트를
ribose.
한다.
These disulfides are produced between cysteines that normally should not produce a disulfide bridge. Okay? So in proteins you have structural disulfide bridges, but if a protein is oxidized, if it's damaged by reactive oxygen species, these disulfides are formed elsewhere in the protein, and that causes damage, that causes changes in the protein structure and therefore in protein function.
RNS 말고.
If the oxidative stimulus is strong enough, the SH group can even be oxidized to various acids derived from sulfur. Okay? Sulfenic, sulfenic, and sulfonic acids. You don't have to know that. While the formation of disulfides can be repaired, so these disulfides can be reduced back to SH groups. Once the sulfur is oxidized like this, it can't be repaired, and therefore these proteins have to be destroyed and have to be made again. Other parts of proteins, other amino acids, can also be damaged by reactive oxygen species in many different ways. But I'm not going to go into the specific details. The one I would like you to remember is that SH groups can be quite easily oxidized. Okay? Any questions?
프로틴이 그래.
Now again, you know from all. So thiol groups are part of cysteine residues in proteins, and these thiol groups can be quite easily oxidized by reactive oxygen species. The oxidation can have several different forms. One of the possible results of oxidation of thiol groups is a reaction with another thiol group and the formation of a disulfide bridge. Or, well, a disulfide anyway. Okay, you've seen this in molecular biology, that disulfide bridges are an important structural component of proteins. But in this case, these disulfides are produced between cysteines that normally should not produce a disulfide bridge. Okay? So in proteins you have structural disulfide bridges, But if a protein is oxidized, if it's damaged by reactive oxygen species, these disulfides are formed elsewhere in the protein, and that causes damage, that causes changes in the protein structure and therefore in protein function. If the oxidative stimulus is strong enough, the SH group can even be oxidized to various acids derived from sulfur. Okay? Sulfenic, sulfenic, and sulfonic acids. You don't have to know that. While the formation of disulfides can be repaired, so these disulfides can be reduced back to SH groups. Once the sulfur is oxidized like this, it can't be repaired, and therefore these proteins have to be destroyed and have to be made again. Other parts of proteins, other amino acids, can also be damaged by reactive oxygen species in many different ways.
Hydroxyl radical.
But I'm not going to go into the specific details. The one I would like you to remember is that SH groups can be quite easily oxidized. Okay? Any questions? We're going to be talking about antioxidants, basically.
야, 안티옥시던트가 제일 중요하잖아.
The two
이거는
main
무슨
groups that I want to talk about the first group are antioxidant enzymes. So enzymes that do something with these reactive oxygen species. The other group are going to be small molecule antioxidants. Okay. Enzymes. One of the most important enzymes that deals with reactive oxygen species is an enzyme called superoxide dismutase.
dismutase, superoxide dismutase.
Have you heard of superoxide dismutase before?
Superoxide dismutase.
Yeah? What did you hear about it?
It takes superoxide and makes water.
Excellent. So, well, it doesn't really make water, but anyway. So, superoxide dismutase. The name of the enzyme kind of tells us what kind of reaction we are to expect, what kind of reaction the enzyme catalyzes. It's called dismutation. What is dismutation? Does anyone know? You react one with the other one, and in that you reduce one of them and oxidize the other one. So you take two molecules and basically you move one electron from one of them to the other one. Or more electrons. But does it make sense? I'm going to show it with superoxide in a minute. So dismutation is a reaction of two molecules of the same thing in which one of them is reduced and the other one is oxidized. So it's a redox reaction between two molecules of the same thing.
Redox
So we have two
reaction.
molecules of superoxide, and we need to reduce one of them and oxidize the other one. So what are going to be the products?
산화 반응 반응이죠. Redox reaction. 여기
So two molecules of
superoxide
superoxide. One of them is going to be
dismutase.
reduced, the other one is going to be oxidized.
Okay, one oxide.
Huh?
One oxide.
Oxygen and O2 to minus.
Excellent.
여학생도 있네요.
So we have one molecule of oxygen and one molecule of, what is that thing?
Oxide.
No, it's not. Peroxide, okay? So I've just added two protons, so we get hydrogen peroxide. Okay, one molecule was oxidized into oxygen, and the other one was reduced into hydrogen peroxide. Does it make sense? Yeah, that's dismutation of superoxide. What I find quite important when looking at this equation is that even though superoxide dismutase is an antioxidant enzyme, it still produces a reactive oxygen species, which is hydrogen peroxide. So that's something I think that's worth remembering, because in experiments, people sometimes would add superoxide dismutase and would say, therefore, we got rid of any oxidative stress, because superoxide dismutase is obviously an antioxidant enzyme. But in fact, what you do when you add superoxide dismutase, you get rid of superoxide, but you produce hydrogen peroxide. And hydrogen peroxide, as you'll recall, can produce which molecule? Which reactive oxygen species can we get from? Hydrogen peroxide itself is not very reactive, but it can produce which reactive molecule?
Hydroxyl radical.
Exactly. So by getting rid of superoxide, which is fairly reactive but not that reactive, you produce hydrogen peroxide that can cause the production of hydroxyl radical, which is hugely, massively reactive. Okay? So just something to remember. Superoxide dismutase, yes, it is an antioxidant enzyme. You get rid of superoxide, but it produces hydrogen peroxide. There are two types of superoxide dismutase, and they both contain metal ions. There is a reason why they contain metal ions, because superoxide itself is negatively charged. So reacting two molecules of superoxide together would be very difficult, because they each have a negative charge. So getting them together to react.
이게 진짜 중요한 거예요. 여기 보면은 슈퍼옥사이드가 반응성이 많아서 프리 레디컬이 많은데, 그걸 없애기 위해서 산화 반응을 시켜가지고 없애면은 이 하이드로진 페록사이드가 나오는데, 이게 뭐가 되냐면은 하이드록실 페록사이드가 된다. 근데 하이드록실 페록사이드가 진짜 위험한 거다. 그런 얘기를 하고 있습니다, 지금. 그럼 뭘 먹어야 되냐?
Be very, very difficult. So what happens in these enzymes is that one molecule reacts with a metal ion, it gives its electron to it, and then another molecule, superoxide, reacts with the reduced ion and becomes reduced itself. Okay. Anyway, the two types of superoxide dismutase are copper zinc. So one of them contains copper and zinc. And that's the kind of superoxide dismutase that's present in the cytoplasm. The other kind of superoxide dismutase contains manganese, and that's the mitochondrial enzyme. Okay? And obviously we need quite a lot of mitochondrial superoxide dismutase, because we just mentioned a second ago that quite a lot of superoxide is produced from complex 1 and complex 3. Okay? So that's superoxide dismutase. By that we produce hydrogen peroxide, so now we need some enzymes that will get rid of hydrogen peroxide. These enzymes are called peroxidases. Okay, peroxidases get rid of peroxides, including hydrogen peroxide. Yes?
Doesn't catalase?
Yeah. Catalase is one of peroxidases, and I'm gonna mention it just in a second. The general reaction of peroxidases is as follows. So we take hydrogen peroxide, we take two reducing equivalents, two electrons basically, and we make two molecules of water. Okay, recall in the beginning when I showed you all the reactions that we can add two electrons to hydrogen peroxide and we can make water. Yeah, so this is what peroxidases in general do. Take hydrogen peroxide, take some donor of electrons, and make water. Water is obviously stable, it's not reactive or anything. So by these two reactions, we basically got rid of any dangerous things. Now, where do we get these reducing equivalents? Where do we get these electrons from? One possible way is to use glutathione. Glutathione. You've heard of glutathione before? The abbreviation usually is GSH.
GSA 글루타치온 아니야?
And we need to use, for the enzyme called glutathione peroxidase,
아니네, 글루타치온.
we need to use 2 molecules of GSH
과산화수소를
as
중화한다.
reducing agents. Okay. What we get from it is GSSG, so we get a dimer. The 2 glutathione molecules actually react with each other. Okay, that's the disulfide bridge that I talked about
그래서 글루타치온이
in oxidizing proteins. So you basically do the same thing. Here you take GSH, 2 SH groups, you oxidize them in order to reduce hydrogen peroxide to water, and you make GSSG. Does it make sense? Sort of? Not really?
과산화수소가
Okay.
몸에 있으면 안 되니까.
So this enzyme is called glutathione peroxidase.
글루타치온이 아니고
And one thing that I want you to remember about
glutathione.
glutathione peroxidase is that it contains a very special trace element, and that's selenium.
글루타치온.
Okay, so glutathione peroxidase contains selenium in the form of selenocysteine. So it looks like cysteine, but instead of sulfur,
Glutathione.
it has selenium.
글루타치온.
Okay, that's glutathione peroxidase. But Rahib, you mentioned another important peroxidase called catalase.
글루타치온도 먹어야겠네.
And catalase is very interesting
비싼가?
because it uses, as the donor of electrons, it uses another molecule of hydrogen peroxide. So it takes hydrogen peroxide, it reduces it to water, but this hydrogen peroxide becomes oxygen. Okay, there are obviously 2 waters, 2 oxygens. Is that right? Sorry, no, it's just 1 oxygen. Does it make sense? So here we took glutathione, reduced glutathione, and we oxidized it to oxidize the glutathione. Just nod your head or shake your head if you don't follow. Okay? Here we took hydrogen peroxide and we oxidized it to oxygen. Okay? And this hydrogen peroxide was reduced to water. In effect, what catalase does, it dismutates hydrogen peroxide. So catalase is basically hydrogen peroxide dismutase, only it's not called that. Yeah? Does it make sense? What happens there? Okay. So these are the most important antioxidant enzymes. There are many other ones, but these are the ones I would like you to remember. Superoxide dismutase, glutathione peroxidase, and catalase. Okay? Now, let's talk about these. Do you have any questions about the antioxidant enzymes?
How do we return them? Because obviously if we have a lot of hydrogen peroxide, we get a lot of GSSG.
Yeah.
We've got some mechanism.
Yeah. There is an enzyme called glutathione reductase. Which uses NADPH to NADP plus and reduces oxidized glutathione. This is the reason, this specifically is the reason why we need NADPH, why people say that NADPH is necessary for protecting, for example, protecting membrane in erythrocytes. Okay? Do you remember that? In erythrocytes, the pentose phosphate pathway is there to produce NADPH to protect the membrane from oxidative damage. And that's the reason. Because we need glutathione peroxidase to get rid of hydrogen peroxide, but in order to do that, we need to be able to reduce glutathione, oxidize glutathione to reduce glutathione, and for that we need NADPH.
글루타치온 존나 이쁘죠.
Okay? Glutathione reductase.
비타민 C보다 더 강력한데?
Any other questions? So this is how we get rid of the, let's say, the less reactive oxygen species. Superoxide, hydrogen peroxide. They are reactive, but not that reactive. But as I said in the beginning, hydroxyl
체내
radical
합성하는
is so
물질 아니야, 이거?
reactive that we can't use any enzyme to do something with it because it will just react with everything. So we can't actually have an enzyme. That's part of the reason why we have small molecule antioxidants that will react, for example, with hydroxyl radical and will detoxify it. And I'm just going to show you how they do it.
줄어드네. 40 넘었으니까 먹어줘야겠구만. 오케이. 이 정도면 많이 봤네요. 역시 글루타사이온, 페록시데이스, 글루트. 비타민 E에 대한 것도 나와요. 비타민 E는 좀 별로 아니야.
It's vitamin E. Okay, vitamin E or tocopherol is a very important antioxidant in our membranes, especially in the cytoplasmic membrane. Okay, I'm not going to go into details about its structure, but it looks something like this. Okay, it can form a radical like that, and this radical is basically delocalized around this whole structure. That makes it relatively stable. Okay, so that's vitamin E. The other important and very, in a way, similar antioxidant that people don't mention very often, well, some people do, is coenzyme Q or ubiquinol. Where is that? Where's coenzyme Q? In the respiratory chain. What does it do there? Transfers electrons between complex 1, complex 2, and complex 3, basically. So this is what ubiquinol looks like in a way. And you can see that it basically looks very similar to vitamin E. If you take this bit of vitamin E and you move it like that, it's very similar. And it actually works as an antioxidant. It works very similarly. So it can form, by this reaction, it can form a free radical, which is all, again, stabilized by delocalization around the ring. So this radical, called ubisemiquinone, it's a semiquinone, is stabilized. And coenzyme Q is by far the most important antioxidant in the mitochondrial inner membrane. Because the concentration of CoQ is very high. It's in the order of 10 to 20 millimolar, very, very high concentration of CoQ. So in the mitochondrial inner membrane, where, as we saw before, a lot of superoxide is produced, because there's the electron transport chain, the most important antioxidant there is coenzyme Q, is ubiquinol. Okay? As for the hydrophilic, I'm going to just mention beta-carotene as the lipophilic, another lipophilic one, but I'm just going to put it in a bracket.
뭐야, 토코페롤에 대해서는 자세히 안 하네. 자, 오늘도 그러면 또라 한번 30분 채워보도록 하겠습니다. 얼굴 너무 크니까 무섭죠? 나는 때를 또 뭐야, 뭐 이상한 놈 들어왔네. 아, 진짜 좀 멋있는 캐릭터 만들면 안 돼? 좀 진짜 망 게임 진짜.
먹고 달래. 와퍼, 웨이퍼. 뭐야 이거? 새로운
음,
그런 게임?
음.
그게 영화 같아.
뭐?
영화.
게임이 영화
뭐?
같다고.
얼굴.
얘 이 사람.
어.
You won't believe your eyes.
좀 멋있는 캐릭터, 제우스 같은 거 이런 거, 이니그마 이런 거 얼마나 멋있어.
그거 영화 나 다음 달 다음 달
뭐
영화.
무슨 영화?
그 남자. 봤어? 봐봐 CGV 들어가서 본 수 있어. 얼굴.
무슨 영화?
CGV. 맘. 이름 뭐지? 왼주제 같은 거.
야, 에일리언 보러 갈래.
무섭다.
진짜 요새 영화 볼 거 없네.
응?
없어.
이게 뭐지 영화?
얘는 뭐 스토리가 없나? 뭐야. 야, 맥스 데미지 480이면은 꽤 세네. 이거 뭐 스케이프? 아, 뭐야 이건 또. 서포터네 서포터. 뭐야 이거. Ringmaster throws one of his daggers to a precise point of his choosing. If he strikes an enemy, the dagger deals impact damage, briefly slows the unit hit, and causes them to bleed. The bleeding deals a percentage of the victim's maximum health and damage every second to heroes, and flat damage per second to creeps. 야. 5%야. 맥스 헬스 데미지 5%. 미쳤네. 아니 슬로우가 100%야. 듀레이션이. 진짜 근데 너무 이렇게 멋이 없는 영웅을 만들었지? 멋이 있어야지, 그지? 우리는 이상한 궁이네 이것도. 어이가 없네요. 어이가 없어. 별로 하고 싶지가 않네요. 터보는 한 게임 하겠습니다. 아니 이걸 멋이 있어야지 하고 싶지. 이걸 뭐 별로 하고 싶은 생각이 없습니다. 실력은 더 이상 오를 데가 없죠. 지금 완벽하죠. 실력은. 아직 없다. 패시시 아직 없네요. 이번에는 완벽한 빌드 한번 꿈의 빌드 한번 실현시켜 보겠습니다.
Your turn to ban. 5
뭐
seconds
해볼까?
remaining.
최강의 히어로. 터보 최강의 히어로는 뭘까요? 그것은 바로
10 seconds remaining.
그것은 바로
5 seconds
그것은 바로
remaining.
리키.
이게 뭐?
야, 4시 10분인데 안 가?
I am Ricky.
로다 터보 제로니야. 터보.
Dispatched.
Prepare for battle.
원래는 터보 없지.
있어.
아 그래?
Yes.
나
30 seconds to battle.
Quiet as cat's feet.
Let's go. 아, 왜 이렇게 와드를 낭비하는 거야?
Since you put it like that. Quietly now.
The battle begins.
Oh, as you bid. I see you. Fails me. Yes. Yes. What is this? The assassin returns.
야, 인비 둘이 갈 순 없잖아, 탑에.
Oh, yes.
아무리 그래도.
A new target. You're mine now. Cash on delivery. As you bid. Like a whisper. Yes. Peekaboo. Ricky, just keep a low profile and we won't have any trouble. I sprint.
야, 우리 그러고 보니까 전부 슬라크까지 있네. 이건 질 수가 없죠, 이거는.
Silence.
오.
The veil it quickly. Silent as smoke. Death's bounty. Starting. Here.
어? 아, 팁을 어떻게 준 거야?
Oh, how I strike. Quickly, quickly. Denied. See no evil. Post haste. Whom shall I kill? See no evil. Here I am. Feet, peasant.
어?
Post haste.
Yes. Bleed for me.
Faster and
Your
stronger.
middle tower is under attack.
I go in silence. At your service. Like a whisper.
룬 먹고 왔나?
Quietly now. Death's bounty. Oh, look, it's me. Since you put it like that. Quickly, quickly. As you bid? I grow stronger. Yes. Whom shall I kill? Makes well. Oh, as you bid. Dispatched. Oh, yes. Silent as smoke. I sprint.
야, 씨, 왜
I
나한테만,
can't wait.
나한테만 그래.
Quickly. Yes. As you bid. Since you put it like that. Post haste. At your service. Cut to the quick. Oh, look, it's me.
Radiant structures are fortified.
Oh, as you bid. Let me once, cut you twice. Whom shall I kill? If you can see. I'm under attack. Quietly now.
역시 터보는 리키죠.
Quickly, quickly. See no evil. Even stealthier. Yes. Like a whisper.
The enemy's bottom tower has been denied.
Dispatched. Oh, yes. Here I am. I go in silence.
아,
I sprint. Quiet as cat's feet. Yes. Why prolong the inevitable? Silent as smoke. Silent as smoke. I'm under attack. Yes. At your service. What a burn. Since you put it like that. See no evil. Oh, look, it's me.
tower has fallen.
Quietly now. Who shall I? Quickly. Oh, now it's on. I sprint. Post haste. Dispatched. I kill. Your body.
Ow.
The enemy's top tower has fallen.
You, my friend, got as you bid. As you bid. I'm under attack. I fight. Quiet as a cat's feet.
Dire's structures are fortified.
I go in silence. Yes. Like a whisper. Quickly, quickly. Oh, yes. Silent as smoke. Steel and tempered. I strike. Oh, yes. Face the darkness. Expect to see less of me. Dead on the dotted line. Defend yourself. What you see is what gets you. Haste! Here I am.
The enemy's top tower has fallen.
Like a whisper. Quickly.
Radiant structures are fortified.
Quietly now. Silent like smoke.
녀석.
The enemy's middle tower has fallen.
Quiet as cat's feet. Quickly, quickly. Yes. Stay for me. Oh, look, it's me. Whom shall I kill? Death's bounty. Yes.
Dominating.
Yes, bleed for me. As you bid. Since you put it like that.
I'm open all night.
I sprint.
사일런스가 있었네.
Post haste. Yes. Wicked rush. Yes! Bleed for me! At your service. Yes. Post haste. Quickly, quickly. Gold for me.
The enemy's bottom tower has fallen.
속도가 엄청 빨라지는구나.
Attack. I go in silence. Quiet as cat's feet. Veil is drawn. I'm under attack. As you bid. Who shall I kill? Who shall I kill? Gotcha! Yes! Wait for me! Dispatched. Silent, like smoke. Quietly now. Since you put it like that. Oh, yes. Yes.
Dire's structures are fortified.
At your service. Like a whisper.
The enemy's bottom tower has fallen. The enemy's bottom barracks has fallen.
야, 보이드.
The enemy's
보이드가
bottom
있는데
barracks
시다니.
has fallen.
Where's the flush? My cunning grows.
The enemy's middle tower has fallen.
Defend yourself.
The enemy's middle barracks has fallen. The enemy's middle barracks has fallen.
Oh, look at me.
역시
The
위키
enemy's middle tower has
꿀잼이죠.
fallen.
아,
The enemy's middle tower has fallen.
어디 갔나?
Your top tower is under attack.
Oh, as you bid.
Radiant victory.
꿀잼이죠, 꿀잼. 아, 역시 터보는 꿀잼. 뭐야? 아우. 아니 터보 게임에 무슨 미드가 사일런서가 어쩌니 이런 얘기를 할 필요가 있나? 그냥 즐겜 하는 거지. 안 그렇습니까, 여러분? 이해가 안 가네. 터보는 그냥 즐겜 하라고 하는 게임인데 그걸 또 여전히 즐겜을 못하는 우리